Okay, welcome back. We got rid of most people, so that's very good, because this is going to be a very sensitive session. I've known Jelle for years. We've been at hacker conferences, I think, since the early 2000s, somewhere-ish. We've been once in a cab even in Las Vegas, and Jelle has a lot of experience in incident response, doing it himself and also managing the incidents. He's currently working for Deloitte, and he's got a very optimistic talk because security is basically dead. Jelle, the floor is yours. Give him an applause.
Thanks, Brenno. Yeah, as Brenno said, my name is Jelle, and I work in a dying discipline. I work in security. And you guys might be like, yeah, wait a second, mister with the strange last name, not so fast. What do you mean security is dead? We read the papers, we read websites, there's incidents, there's breaches, there's malware all the time. What do you mean? How come this industry can be dead? It should be alive and kicking, right? Well, as Brenno said, I've worked a lot in incident response. For over 10 years, I've investigated some of the largest, most sensitive data breaches around the world. And right now at Deloitte, I lead the team that is responsible for trying to fix things in the first place, the Secure by Design group, so to say. So yes, I see where you're coming from if you are a little bit suspicious about this title. So let me try to sort of take you through why I think the industry as we know it is dead. Because this is what we feel, right? The burning world, the headlines, there's problems everywhere. However, in reality, how do we deal with these problems? In a lot of organizations, security is still driven by compliance. It is this paper tiger. It is, as Jess also already mentioned in his introduction talk this morning, it is one team filling out a massive spreadsheet to send off to another team to keep each other busy, pretty much. And it hardly ever reflects reality. It takes up a lot of time, a lot of money, and don't get me wrong, I don't think the Russian or Chinese hackers are anywhere near afraid of our efforts there. We also don't acknowledge that people adapt. People, our colleagues, our clients, our customers using our systems, they adapt. As soon as we release something, people start using it in a different way than it was intended in the first place. And I always like this analogy on the screen very much of the desire trails or olifantenpaadjes in Dutch, because this is what happens in all our organizations all the time. What you see, the council probably planned this. The bus stop you see in the middle, they planned that if you wanted to walk to the bus stop, you had to walk towards the left, cut the corner, nicely use the sidewalk. People being always looking for an effective way to achieve their task. Of course, at some point, I like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. I'll go straight ahead across the grass. A couple of people start following, and before you know it, you start to see these little trails form themselves on the grass. And these are beautiful things, because this is, if you think about these kinds of actions in a business, people using things in a slightly different way than they were designed, that's the organization sending you a message. That's the organization telling you, hey, this can be done in a better, more effective way. In fact, we're already doing it this way. That's not how security people tend to think, though. Security people still aim for this imaginary world. I always think the CISO is the chief imaginary security officer, still putting up signs. In this example, we would probably, after the sign, we would put up a little fence, and people would probably step over it, so we would make it higher, and we would put up cameras, guard dogs, you name it. But we failed to take a step back and say, hey, wait a second, the organization is telling us that there might be a better, a more effective way of doing our work. Is there a way we can accommodate that in a secure way? As I said, that's not how we security people think. We are the infamous department of no. In a lot of organizations known for, if you ever have a good idea, And if you want to get something done, well, yeah, then better not speak to security, because they're going to see lots of hurdles and they're going to try and talk you away from it. And with the end result that in most cases, security only gets consulted with a binary yes-no question. Can I put my data in the cloud? Yes or no? Can I use USB sticks? Yes or no? It's hardly ever that security gets questions along the lines of, I'm trying to do something cool, something innovative. Can you help me with that? Can we work together on that? We've steered people away from that mindset. And why is that? I think part of that lies in that we admire breaking stuff so much. And of course, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of people in security come from a hacking kind of background, and there's definitely a place for trying to break things, trying to see if they work in the intended way. But in reality, even this has become a sort of a compliance exercise. You're trying to build something, and then a day before go live, you do this required penetration test. 10 findings, you try to fix 5, you accept the risk for the other 5, and it's another tick in the box. And it's moved away from what it was meant to be, actually testing security in reality. And instead it becomes almost in a lab style, very isolated pieces of applications that we test in a very controlled environment. And as soon as we put them out in the big bad world, they start behaving very differently. And this, of course, this doesn't scale as well, right? If the main topic of today, moving faster, developing faster, releasing faster, in this traditional model of you build it, I break it, it takes weeks to get these tests scheduled even in many organizations. That doesn't really work if you want to release 10, 100 or 1,000 times a day, like in the Amazon example that we saw. We're also terrible at taking things away. I always call these we build these sort of InfoSec Jenga towers of measures. We have a good practice that was good 10 years ago, and then we add another tool and another procedure and another instruction, and it's all well intended, don't get me wrong, but we hardly ever say, hey, this thing from 10 years ago, the world has changed a little bit. Does that actually still work? Should we still do this? And we keep layering, make things more complex. It's intended to be layers of defense, but in reality, it's all too often becoming layers of excuse. I don't have to check this as thoroughly because there's still a couple of other departments that should check it as well. So we should be far more critical there in, are there things we can take away, stop doing, and in doing that, save time and save money to spend on really effective stuff. There's a party that might be partly to blame for that. We are an industry that is very much still driven from what the vendors say. They sort of set the agenda on what's the latest and greatest trend, and of course they happen to have the solution for that as well. So that's another area where we have to be very, very critical about. And I think with that it's also keeping challenging those old beliefs. It's great that we're the department of no when it comes to somebody trying to implement something very old that was the good practice 10 years ago. Like, for example, regularly changing your password, getting this prompt every 2 to 3 months. It's time again, you have to change your password. So it's March, so I'll just add 03 to whatever I had. By now, from research, it's been concluded that that doesn't lead to people creating more secure passwords. And in fact, if you look at how passwords are stolen in reality, it doesn't really protect that well anyway. So these organizations are suggesting now, let's empower people to create very long, very strong passwords without the weird characters, but just long, can be sentences, and don't ever bother them again with changing it, with changing them. And we're terrible when it comes to blaming victims. And even clearly stating who's the victim. On one hand, our industry says everybody will go through an incident at some place, at some point in time. Don't ask if you will be breached, ask when. So it seems we sort of accept that things might go wrong at some point in time. However, if something then does go wrong in reality, and our, you could say, fellow security teams are in the trenches, working their asses off trying to get the problem resolved, we become these sort of Monday morning quarterbacks. We start to lean back, enjoy viewing their work, and especially commenting about every wrong move they're making, everything they've done wrong in the first place, and clearly stating that we saw this coming for a long time already. It's a terrible, terrible example of victim blaming, because, again, who's to blame here? There's a criminal actively attacking these organizations here. And maybe we're even worse when it comes to users, to people. Because we have these funny kind of cartoons. People are the weakest link, or there's no patch for human stupidity. You can even get t-shirts with this stuff. I mean, that's crazy, right? These people, yeah, of course, maybe we think they're not always doing the right things, but they are our colleagues, they are our customers, they are the people paying our salaries. It's very pedantic, very condescending and patronizing to have this notion that we have created this safe and trustworthy and reliable environment, and it's only because of those idiots making a mess of everything we have these problems. That's just plainly untrue. And maybe as a very brief, simple example, phishing. I mean, most of us recognize that phishing is a serious problem because it is often one of the first, you could say, events in a larger chain of events leading to an incident. So we sent our teams or our people on phishing training to recognize emails that might be malicious and to sort of help them recognizing these. But is that even the real problem we're trying to solve? We spent over 20 years teaching people how to click on links. We're like, yeah, if it's a different color, or if in the old days it was blue and underlined, and if you put your mouse cursor on it and you click, then something fun happens, or you get to learn something, or, well, whatever it is, click and something nice happens. And now all of a sudden we're trying to undo that learning again. We're like, yeah, that link thing, it's actually a little bit more complicated, and will give you 20 different things, difficult things to check that you cannot even check on your mobile device, and we don't even empower you to report any suspicious emails. And again, it's a compliance exercise where we say, okay, we've sent everybody on phishing training, job done, back to work. So this is a bit of a somber start to this sunny day, right? So what to do with all this? And aren't there any improvements to share with you guys? Well, the banks are positive. The banks in the Netherlands are very positive, because what they're saying, what the graph on the screen show, the green line, that's fraud losses because of internet banking fraud. So this looks great. It's a decline. So the banks are, rightly so, banging the drums about this. Fraud due to internet banking fraud in the Netherlands is getting lower and lower and lower. So maybe there is a positive spin to all of this. Well, they can't take all the credit. Because what we do see at play here, which is one of the interesting but complicating matters when it comes to security, is that you see whack-a-mole or a waterbed effect at play here. It became harder and harder to steal money from internet banking attacks. And internet banking attacks don't scale very well either, because think of it. If I want to steal money from somebody, I need to get their banking credentials. I need to trick them into maybe typing in a one-time code that the bank asks them to type. But that's not all that there's to it. That's almost the easy part, because what do you do when you steal money? You don't wire it to your own account. That would be the stupidest thing to do. That's the easiest way to get caught. So you also need to recruit money mules, people who let you borrow their bank accounts for a little while. You need to recruit other people who can then put the money, take it out of the cash machine. You need a whole ecosystem of people to support you, and that costs money. And don't get me wrong, these people are criminals, but these are also people who have a business to run. And what they recognize like no one else, and do far better than a lot of companies, is to keep innovating. They recognize, the banks are making our lives a little bit harder, and actually there are a lot of manual steps in this banking fraud involved that costs a lot of money, and you can only use these borrowed accounts for only a little while. So how can we make this more efficient? How can we innovate our business model? So yes, banking fraud has gone down, and that's partly a success, but that's also because most of these groups have now moved into backup awareness training. It's unintended backup awareness training. It's infecting people with ransomware. It's infecting people with malicious software that encrypts all the sensitive files on their machine and lets them pay money to get the data back. And this is far better from the criminal's perspective, because this scales. You only have to infect somebody, and the payment happens directly via digital currency. So you take out all those nitty-gritty manual steps, and you get a far better return on investment than in the internet banking fraud. It's fun as well, or interesting I should probably say, that they take this business approach even further, because they also think about the customer. It's an unintended customer, don't get me wrong, but they aim for an excellent customer experience. Because think of it again, if you happen to have one of these infections and you lost all your sensitive photos and documents, and you get a note like this on the screen, pay me 200 or 300 euros in bitcoins to get it back. If you did pay and you would not get your photos back, that rumor would start spreading pretty soon. You would tell, oh, I had this infection, paid, didn't get anything back. So after this happens more and more, nobody will ever pay again. So it's interesting, these criminals, they have this clear financial interest to deliver on the promise, to offer excellent customer service. So indeed, if you pay, in most of the cases, you will get your data back. And in fact, if you have trouble paying or you don't understand, there's help desks and there's hotlines to help you make the deal. So it is actually really approaching this from a business perspective. So we're still a little bit on the somber, in the somber mood, I guess, when it comes to security. So let's see if there are some ideas or some approaches that we could try to maybe revitalize this dead or at least close to dying industry that we're working in. I think it's important that we try to start looking at things more from this systemic view, and especially keep money in mind there. Literally follow the money, like in the ransomware example that I gave, but in a lot of other examples as well. Our problems are not merely a technical problem, but it's also a matter of who to pick up the bill. Because think of, for example, something that was in the news a couple of months ago by now. Smart cameras, relatively cheap. You can connect to your internet at home. The software is not really up to scratch, so they get hacked. And they get hacked not to hack the camera, or to look at the camera. They actually get hacked to empower another attack at a website, a journalist website. So the journalist website gets knocked offline because there are a lot of these cameras trying to request pages from the website. So this is a weird ecosystem we're talking about, especially if you follow the money. The manufacturer doesn't invest enough in security. Me as the consumer, I probably want to get a cheap camera, so I'm probably also not too keen to pay extra for maybe getting a better, more secure camera. And especially as I don't really notice that there's something wrong. Yes, my camera is hacked, but it probably still works. Maybe my internet connection is a little bit slow, but I might not even notice that there's a problem. And the real victim here is this journalist who was not even involved in the whole transaction in the first place. So how do we make this better? How do we incentivize the manufacturer to maybe think of security by design when they make these cameras? Or how do we nudge these consumers to pay a little bit more? Or should the government step in here and get some sort of certification scheme involved? These are tough questions, and I don't think we really have the answers yet, unfortunately, but thinking about our problems with this view can help to move beyond just this technical viewpoint that we all too often take. And we should take our organizations, our businesses, to be what they are. They are, deep down, they're complex systems, and like I already said earlier, a complex system, as soon as you put it in the real world, it starts behaving differently than you intended for it to be used. And interactions might happen in a different way than you anticipated, or people behaved in a different way than you anticipated. And most of the times that's a good thing, because that helps our organizations to be adaptive and to be resilient. And this is what a lot of organizations, what makes a lot of organizations work and effective. But we have to keep that in mind as well when we, of course, look at why do things go wrong and how can we influence that. And with that, I think we need to, in general, also adopt a broader view and look at other industries that we can learn from, because we have this notion that we are special snowflakes and that all the problems in security are unique and nobody has ever thought about them before. Well, if you ask me, that's completely wrong, because especially if it comes to this more systemic level and if it comes to changing people's behavior, those are questions that other industries or other disciplines have already researched for decades, if not centuries. So one of the easy things we should adopt more is move away from those good practices I mentioned, and don't assume we already have the right answer to all the problems, but start prototyping and measure if our prototype works or not and has the intended effect. And I think A/B testing is a very powerful mechanism to assess the effectiveness, because what is A/B testing? A/B testing is an approach that is really common in all sorts of online environments. So people who create websites, e-commerce environments and so on. But taking a step back again, it's also the foundation behind science in general, because what do you do in A/B testing? You present half of your test group with one version of, let's say, an interface, and the other half with another version. And then you try to measure which one gives the best effect, whether it's more sales, more conversion, whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Facebook tested this when they were developing a new app for iOS, for Apple's mobile operating system. And they tried two icons to show you when the app was busy, when you were waiting for something to happen. And the one with the rectangles, that's a new icon they developed themselves. The one on the right, the circle, you probably recognize it if you're an Apple user. That's the standard icon that iOS uses whenever it's busy. So half got the rectangles, other half got the circle, and they asked for feedback. And feedback was something along the lines of, we like the new app. People who had the rectangle set, sometimes Facebook was a little bit slow. So remember that, Facebook slow. People on the right, similar feedback, yeah, great app. Sometimes my phone was a little bit slow. Facebook slow, my phone slow. Wait, this is interesting. It turned out that people had a completely different perception of these waiting icons. The new icon they associated with Facebook, the one they recognized they associated with their phone. And of course the waiting times were exactly the same. Nothing was different in the back end. So Facebook of course went for the circle so that any delays or slowness could be blamed on Apple. So I like these kind of elegant approaches, because I think we can use this a lot, not just in interfaces, but also in wording. Again, why not create two or three different versions of a policy or an instruction and try to measure which one works best for our audience. And we should try to learn from incidents, from things going wrong. And that's something that doesn't come natural to our industry, because nobody is keen to share, hey, I've been hacked and these are the 20 things I did wrong. I think there's some good progress though. The report you see on the screen, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, tries to counter that argument by collating incident data on a massive scale. So it's from incident response teams, both private sector, both public, it's law enforcement, aggregating it and trying to see what are the trends, what are the underlying factors whenever there is a breach. So whenever you have one of these headlines that we started with. So I think this is a great example. Try to learn from what happens when things go wrong. Try to learn from incidents, or create your own incidents. Netflix was already mentioned in Jesse's talk. They've developed this piece of software, the Chaos Monkey, which its sole purpose is to, as the name suggests, create chaos. This piece of software does nothing else than randomly unplug servers, shut down segments of the network, even whole data centers or whole cloud zones. And by doing that, Netflix essentially trains their engineers to be to program in a very resilient way, to be ready for these kinds of disturbances, because of course they will happen in reality as well. And it's through the use of this software that Netflix often gets credited for having hardly any negative effects whenever there's something like an Amazon outage, like there was in the news a couple of weeks ago. But I think we should also focus not just on the bad things. As an example, what you see on the screen, I'm running some sort of experiment, and I'm keeping track of whenever it goes wrong, whenever I have an incident. So I've plotted that in a graph, and I suspect that there might be some sort of relationship with the temperature. So on the horizontal axis you see the temperature, vertical you see the number of incidents, the red dots. Can we see a pattern here? Does this work better when it's warm? Does it work better when it's cold? What should I do? Or maybe let's even do this as a show of hands. Let's say it is cold. It is something like the 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So really on the left. Who wants to go ahead? Who says we should not go ahead with this experiment? Can I see a show of hands? 50 degrees. Couple of hands. Okay, can I see a show of hands for who wants to go ahead when it's 50 degrees? Roughly 50-50. I have a tragic message for those last people, because indeed it is hard to spot. But what we've just done, we've just blown up the Challenger. And 7 people have died because the O-rings that were meant to isolate were actually not performing as well in cold temperatures. But that was hard to spot from that graph. Those failures were all over the place, right? And that's only when in the sort of post-mortem that NASA acknowledged this. And indeed, it becomes far more clear if you also start plotting the no-incident flights, the no failures. So yes, it's good to focus on incidents, and I think there's a lot of value in that, but we should also not keep track of observing what drives good performance, and should not lose that from our eye. What I think we also should adopt is this done is better than perfect mindset. And again, that's hard for security people, because a lot of us are techies and we like the technically perfect solution. And what do I mean with this? I can probably best illustrate with how we think about encryption. Because when it comes to end-to-end encryption, like for example encrypting emails, we've had PGP, pretty good privacy. It's been on the market for over 20 years already. And it's great. I mean, it does the job really well. Even government agencies are worried about intercepting this. So, perfect solution, you would say. However, that's also the problem. It is perfect, but it's a little hard to use. And because of that, there's only a small user base for this piece of software. There's probably only, in the range of the thousands, tens of thousands worldwide of people who use it, and some of them even still using it in the wrong way. So that's one end of the spectrum. PGP, technically great, hard to use, low adoption. The other hand, we have WhatsApp, which last year implemented end-to-end encryption, pretty much the flip of a switch, rolled it out to over 1 billion people. And we security people are then immediately like, well, it's encryption, but what about the key exchange? That's a little bit strange, and people don't really check the keys, and can we even trust Facebook? And Of course, these are good questions to ask, don't get me wrong, but I think we should also be a little bit less pretentious here and say, yeah, well, okay, it's probably not good if you are protecting against maybe nation-state attackers, but actually what would we rather see? PGP that nobody ever uses, or more than 1 billion of people using end-to-end encryption that maybe 80–90% good? I would pick the latter in most of the cases. And it's looking for these kinds of opportunities to scale up, where we have to be less pretentious and less to focus on this looking for the perfect solution. And another example there is using SMS as a mechanism to deliver one-time passwords. So you might recognize this from your banks or some websites that you use. You log on and you get a code sent to your phone, and it's only valid once. And again, there we security people get a little bit pretentious, and we think that everybody is sort of James Bond fighting nation states, and we're like, yeah, well, SMS, that's not secure anymore. The mechanism is insecure by design. You have to trust the telco operators, and governments can intercept. Again, valid points, but looking at if we want to achieve scale, and as Alex Stamos, the CISO of Facebook, put it, if more organizations adopted this, we would have disrupted so many of these fraud industries. It's again thinking about impact rather than this technical perfection. And sometimes we also have to scale down and be clever and elegant about that. One thing that Slack was struggling with, they wanted to know whenever their engineers were running a sensitive command. So something that could, for example, delete a database. And they were thinking, okay, if we can send an alert to our security operations center whenever there is one of these sensitive commands being entered. Something along the lines of, hey, Ryan is now entering this command. That's pretty tough for the operating center. They get dozens, if not hundreds of alerts a day, and probably 99.9% of the cases, it's legitimate. And you only want to find this one case where an attacker might have stolen an account and is running these commands. So what they now implemented is this mechanism where if you run a command, you get asked for an acknowledgement. So like you see on the screen, Ryan is entering the command, and he gets this message, hey Ryan, I see you're running a sensitive command, can you acknowledge it's really you? And to make it, of course, to prevent somebody who's stolen Ryan's account for saying, hey, yeah, it's me, I'm Ryan, where I'm actually in Russia, they want to send this acknowledgement via a second vector, via the phone, for example. So I like these kinds of things as well. This is a very elegant way to really scale down and only get the alerts that really matter sent to the operating center for the human operators to look at. And what I think a lot of this boils down to is that security, in my view, is not a responsibility, and it's not a team. It is something, it's almost like a muscle. It's something that you have to keep training continuously, because it has to be strong, but also not too strong, because then it becomes slow. And you cannot train it in isolation, because like if you want to do sports, you don't train your muscles in isolation. You need to have good coordination as well. So you need to train in a very clever and a very effective way. And I think we can also only do that if we also think about how we position our teams and aim to be this more likable team. So not this department of no that I started off with, but have this approach where we really want to help our organizations move forward and become far more approachable, far more accommodating, instead of almost making fun of people who do, in our views, something stupid or something wrong. So from the department of no, in my view, towards the team of hell yeah, the team that everybody wants to work with, because you know if you speak to security, they're smart, they want to think with you, they have clever solutions, and they help you get the job done. And if I try to summarize what I think then security is, I at some point ended up with this word worthwhile, because I think that characterizes it really well. Because it has, on one hand, it has the meaning of security having value, so it's valuable to the organizations, but it's also worth the time, and which to me sounds like it's worth working on. It's interesting problems, it's a fun environment to work on, so it's worth spending time on as well. So it has these two aspects, but it has also this sort of larger than life sounding meaning, where which to me suggest it also helps to move from sheer confidence. I have confidence that this will work in the way I intended it to work, towards the far harder thing to achieve, which is trust. And I think that is something that most of our businesses, the digital businesses that a lot of us work in, are aiming for, but that's not something that you can sort of engineer your way towards. That is something almost a bit of a journey, a higher thing that you're aiming for and that you're trying to build towards. And that's for me what this worthwhile security term very much connotates. So as I said, we started somber on this beautiful day. I hope I, in the second part, managed to turn that view around a little bit when showing some more positive examples. So yes, I do think security as we know it is dead, but would also say long live security, especially if we think of it as a more systemic way of solving things, a more enabling way of looking at the problem with this ultimate goal, this ultimate journey of building trust within the organizations that we work on. So again, security is dead, but also long live worthwhile security. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have a question for the Grim Reaper? At all?
I will be around as well, so.
Well, you say that the security department should be like, let's do it, and don't say no, but there are many occasions where they really have to say no, because otherwise the security is in jeopardy. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so you're saying that sometimes we do have to be strict and say no. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think, but I think it's also a little bit in the way which we phrase the no. Maybe that's a more subtle way of putting it. Because right now I think it's very often along the lines of, hey, you approach this very late. It's the day before go live. We're going to say no. Deal with it. And I think it's also for us a matter of moving more towards the left in the whole development cycle and being more involved earlier on, so that we don't even end up in that position where we have to say a definitive yes or no. I think that's really what it comes down to. And I think it's also, if we say no, then at least that we say, no, not in this way. However, I have a couple of ways in which I can help you. Or maybe this is not the best way to do this. However, I have a tool that helps you to achieve what you want to achieve. So
we have to say no in a nice way.
It's no in a nicer way, and indeed maybe a no end. Maybe that's the better way, indeed.
Other questions? Other questions, sir. Catch it if you can.
Hi there. Yeah, you mentioned that it's important to identify the human factor. Not so long ago in the Dutch voting system, although the computers and everything were very secure, they found that there was a loophole in someone transporting a USB stick from one station to the other. I'm just curious, how do you identify these possible problems?
So you're saying how to identify the possible human problems. I think there are various different ways. I think one way that's used more and more, which I think is in line with approaching this not in isolation, but rather as a sort of end-to-end perspective, is what's now called red teaming, which, for those that are not familiar, is a method of doing a security test where you just say, okay, this is the target we want to achieve. These are your crown jewels, your most sensitive data. Let's try to see if we can steal them in whichever way we can think of, like a real attacker would do. So that's different from those penetration tests where you say, I take this little piece of an application and I test it in isolation and that's it. You're really saying, okay, can I maybe even walk into the bank or whatever organization it is and plug in a device in the network and use that to further my attack. So that might be one mechanism. Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the situation as well, if there are any others. I think in general also trying to see what are the sort of the incentives of everybody involved and what helps them, what hinders them, will also help to try to see, hey, this does not make sense. If you are that person in that job, I would expect in reality you probably do something different than is intended.
Thank you very much. You'll be around for
I will
another
be,
round of
yeah.
questions. I've been told not to try and steal the wine anymore. So here's a thank you,
My pleasure.
and give him another warm round of applause.
Thank you very much.
And within 10 minutes, we're going to talk about sick of Scrum.